Thank you, Jonathan. Wonderful to meet you.
Okay.
Hopefully we can build something together real quick in 6 minutes here. So I've been enthralled by your discussions about higher beings and the ontology of higher beings. We're talking about like egregores and demons and all this kind of stuff, and the analogies with cities and sports teams and all this kind of thing. And I'm curious, John, just offhandedly, I think during the discussion, had mentioned Evan Thompson's mind-life continuity thesis. And I was very grateful to have studied under Evan a number of years ago. And he was one of the popularizers of the idea of autopoiesis. Are you familiar with that term and the idea?
I mean, I understand it in the way that John explains it, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay, good. So essentially, just for everybody else real quick, it's essentially a pattern that two Chilean biologists suggest represent life rather than all of the other, accidental properties of life, like reproduction and this kind of stuff, right? And the pattern's basically a network of processes that each buttress all the other processes in the network, while also creating a boundary in which those processes can sort of safely evolve.
Preserved,
Yeah. And so the kind of aha moment there is that this is a pattern, not a material.
Right.
And, I've heard John say real patterns a number of times too, and Daniel Dennett, a famous philosopher, wrote a paper, Real Patterns, where he talks about a real pattern being sort of an information preserving function. And so I'm wondering if you've ever considered using autopoiesis and then sort of the genus of autopoiesis is an autonomous system. And the difference there is just autopoiesis typically is related to the paradigmatic example of a single cell, but the organization is similar to an autonomous system. And if you've considered that sort of organization as a way of characterizing the higher beings.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned that because it is something that I've been thinking about just privately for a while and trying to formulate a defense, let's say, and this, I use the city in my mind, I'm using the city as an example, to use an example to describe a city as autopoietic, because especially if you understand like an ancient city with a wall, and then you have the guards on the wall, and you have the center of interest in the middle that gives the identity, and so and then you need a certain permeability right in that border in order for there to be potential that comes in, and that would probably be a good way to help people understand why it is that I talk about these higher beings as having something, at least analogical relationship to the way we understand biological beings, and that it's a strict analogy, right? It's not just like some metaphor or whatever, that there's an actual structural analogy. But you're right, but I've never said that. Like, that's the first time that I'm saying that, but it is something that it's like one of those future videos that I'm planning. Like at some point, I want to try to use that example. So you have a good insight on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I see we're at 3 minutes and 19 seconds.
Go for it.
I might be able to extend this a little further.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've sort of only recently kind of begun to understand is that through that process of sort of self-generation or self-creation, it seems like the system is modifying the universe in some way, right? Like Evan says it's thermodynamically open, like you're saying you've got permeable membranes where energy flows through, but it's organizationally closed. Every piece of the organization influences another piece of the organization. And it struck me, Evan's mind-life continuity thesis suggests that the beginnings of consciousness and the beginnings of cognition happen at this organizational level. And that goes back to Francesco Varela, who was one of the originators of the term. And it made me think, because I know there's been a lot of discussion going on about whether these higher beings are conscious.
Yeah,
right?
I think they are. I avoid it because I don't think at this point it's necessary to get to that. Like, it's like, if you don't think it's conscious, that's fine. We can talk around it for now. We'll get to there later. But I do think that. And I think that that definition of consciousness in terms of autopoiesis, I think to me, it's very attractive.
Yeah.
To understand that all things that act towards their self-preservation are conscious to a certain level, at least at
least some level. Basic primordial level. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I guess we're a little bit ahead of time, but that's what I wanted to ask you.
This is great, but you're seeing into the future of the things I'm going to be talking about. Like, I will talk about this in the next few years. But if you're interested, you can look at, I did a recent video on the left and right hand symbolism. And I talk
Yes.
about the relationship between gathering in and ejecting, or the relationship from a concentric relationship and eccentric relationships. And I think that in terms of autopoiesis, it's probably a very good way to understand the problem of this self-organizing or whatever, this organized structure that necessarily must be in relationship with others. And so it has to have these two currents. And these two currents are, I mean, they're super old. You find them in the Bible, but you also find them, that's what the alchemists, they were talking about this, right? And I know for a fact that when the alchemists talked about these two currents of concentric and eccentric movement, they were talking about them as structural and not as just, can I say this, as just a kind of physical representation, like some kind of chemistry thing. But it really was they were talking about a structural pattern in reality that is as true for objects as for a person or anything that we can recognize as being, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.